Deep in the heart of the forest, two big green orcs found themselves facing a woman lying on the ground, her clothes all messy and her breath racked. The attacking orc joked about how lucky he was to find someone wandering alone in the forest. But their mission was important, so they decided it was time to get rid of her. But just before they could do anything, another orc spoke up. He wanted a companion for the future, which was quite a challenge given their usual guard duties. As his companion started responding, an arrow swiftly pierced through him. Head off. Shocked, the remaining orc looked up to see a knight and an elf emerging from the south. They couldn't believe it. Orcs were supposed to be guarding the south better, the knight remarked, dismissing the orc's inefficient response by beheading him and shifting their focus to the injured girl. The knight and elf sprang into action to save her while reflecting on the orc's actions, linking them to wild instincts from the past. Long-lasting, devastating wars had ravaged the entire continent of Vonia. The origin of the conflict was now lost in history, forgotten by those who suffered for 5 decades in the relentless battles among the 12 races. But like all things, even this seemingly endless war had to come to an end. News of the war's conclusion spread quickly. The orcs were summoned to their Nemesis king in a solemn announcement. He declared their decision to surrender and accept a treaty with the alliance of 4 races. The death of the demon king Jedis had forced the unity of the 7 races to acknowledge their defeat. However, the orcs were furious at the sudden resolution. Their voices rose in protest, screaming to fight till the bitter end. They questioned how they could secure a brighter future in friendship if they didn't resist. Despite their strong objections, they reluctantly accepted their defeat. 3 years passed, and the famous hero known as Bosch, awarded for his strength as the mightiest orc, found himself sitting alone in a tavern. He possessed the authorities' food and respect from every orc life. It seemed like a dream, having the power to shape his world as he pleased and more, all within his grasp on the nearby table. Fellow orcs engaged in conversation about the hero's extraordinary feats. One orc teased another for even thinking about the upcoming feast, emphasizing its importance. But a curious orc expressed a desire to ask about Bosch's story defeating the infamous Blackhead. His friend warned him again about the bravery of speaking to Bosch. Speculating on Bosch's preferences, they suggested that a man of his caliber might be interested in the legendary dragon race, tired of dealing with humans. But behind the facade of Bosch's seemingly perfect life lay a hidden truth that burdened him, something he longed for no matter how strong he was. As the party passed, another orc quickly cowered in fear and began to apologize profusely, but Bosch paid them no mind and left the bar. Unbeknownst to them, the party was grappling with personal issues. He left the bar, the issue that had been bothering him becoming the center of his thoughts despite the accolades and respect showered upon him. Bosch, at 28 years old, had never experienced intimacy with a woman. He carried the burden as a virgin, a weighty secret on his shoulders despite the outward portrayal of a victorious hero. Originating from the turbulent period of the Long War, born a human captive amidst chaos at the age of 10, he found himself on the battlefield facing countless dangers. 5 fast years and no other job could match his prowess, earning him the title of the strongest warrior among his kin. In the midst of adversity, consistently charging into battles to secure victory for the orc army, he believed he faithfully followed his orcish instincts. However, a realization dawned on him. Usually brutal victors would bring home women as war spoils, but Bosch found himself an exception. Although there were no virgins in his troop, he remained untouched. The war offered opportunities to capture women from the enemy, but the landscape had changed with the new peace treaty. No longer could they forcibly take women as spoils of war, with the alternative being visiting the mating chamber. But the prospects of his hero reputation attracted crowds, blocking him from that path. The burden of his lack of experience in parties seemed heavy, knowing that if his fellow orcs realized his lack of prowess, the honor of his tribe would be trampled. He felt obligated to continue his lineage, a responsibility growing larger because of his role as an orc hero. But he struggled with conflicting emotions, eager to continue his lineage soon but afraid of disappointing the younger generation and tarnishing his image as a respected hero. Another source of anxiety stemmed from the looming deadline, despite his training efforts. If he reached the age of 30 untouched, mark would appear on his forehead, marking him as an orc mage, while orcs serving their nation in exile would be an honorable path. But for Bosch, it would signify shame. The agreement worked for a man who hadn't partaken in the spoils of war. He feared the ridicule and mockery that would accompany such a fate, believing it would nullify any claim to victory he might make after much contemplation. He approached Nemesis King to convey his intentions through the Demon King. Nemesis King already knew the secret of Bosch's purity and desire to change his condition. He promised to keep this issue secret if given the chance to regain his honor. The party swore loyalty to Nemesis until death, seeing an opportunity to redefine his narrative and start a path that could redeem him in the eyes of his fellow orcs. As Bosch departed, one enemy servant asked about his purpose. The king replied vaguely, stating that Bosch had started a trial to prove his worth as a true hero. Although traditional hopes of orc heroes having wives, even the mighty king couldn't use his power to grant Bosch one. While Bosch could choose a peaceful life in the village, he chose to uphold his hero's dignity. And the strongest orc has set off on a journey to meet his wife and bring forth his offspring into this world. The common belief is that the desiring descendants must take the initiative, though there are individual differences. With their strong and appealing human bodies, they attract orcs as potential bearers of their children. Bosch has lived by this principle all his life, maintaining a stronghold at the human city border in his country until the war ended. While patrolling, the hero caught a faint scent of blood, sensing the presence of a beast nearby. He hoped to find food, but upon reaching the scene, he discovered a group of muscular bugbears attacking a human woman. The bugbears quickly backed off when faced with Bosch's intimidation. While by most orc standards, this woman might not be considered very attractive. Having not seen a woman up close for years on the battlefield, he was drawn to her confident smile. He approached the women bravely and boldly asked if they were interested in singing. The children were confused by the sudden turn of events as the fleeing party of women left them wondering about their reaction. From a small box at her feet, he found a jar containing fairy dust. The fairy showed surprise upon meeting her master again after a long absence, unaffected by the fairy's attempts to hug him. With enthusiasm, the fairy chatted, convincing Bosch that he could never forget her with a personality like hers. The fairy was curious about how Bosch knew that they were being attacked, but Bosch said it was just a coincidence, though he emphasized the severity of the situation, considering the attack on their cart and the act of betrayal shown by the fairy. If a simple-minded human were to see Bosch near the damaged cart, they might mistakenly think he was the culprit implicated in the bear's actions. Bosch began to sink into the bear's actions in a sudden panic explosion, with the fairy screaming, reminding Bosch of the approaching presence. He asked if he was ready to fight, but Bosch pondered the consequences of fighting on human-inhabited land, deeming it unwise considering his quest to find a wife. He suggested a strategic retreat as they withdrew. The fairy's adventurous spirit and curious mind explained her desire to explore, pushing Bosch to adopt a similar approach, urging him to find out what he was looking for while sharing her belief that Bosch, as an orc hero, should lead a happy life without troubles. She declared her commitment to help him in any way she could. Bosch reflected on the fairy's skills in gathering information and her familiarity with the lifestyles of various species, recognizing her potential as a valuable companion. He appreciated the assistance she could provide on his journey, ultimately opening up to the fairy, revealing that he was on a quest to find a wife. The fairy acknowledged the importance of a wife for an orc, highlighting the current challenges in finding a suitable partner. She noted that it was becoming increasingly difficult for orcs to attract potential wives, given the scarcity of women willing to take on the role of an orc's wife. Her willingness to volunteer if she wasn't a fairy reassured the party that they could easily find 10 or 20 wives in no time. The party entrusted this matter to her capable hands, with the fairy at their helm, stepping out of the forest and embarking on an adventure to the human city, ready to begin the search for a suitable wife for Bosch and Zell. They walked to the tightly guarded city of Krell, a place rich in the history of many human-orc conflicts. It was understandable that the locals were wary of Bosch's presence, choosing to be wise in their discretion. They decided to head to the INF first as they navigated the bustling streets, encountering many women, but Bosch realized he couldn't freely make his choices without constraints. The rule of one man and one woman among humans prohibited him from pursuing married women once entered. In their room at the inn, Zell commented on the prejudice that still lingered against orcs. The men in the city were likely afraid of the party, while the women might think he would father children indiscriminately. The party understood the root of these fears and acknowledged that such suspicions were unfounded, considering the torn history of war between orcs and humans. They realized it would take time for the deep-seated wariness toward orcs to dissipate among the human population. Understanding the nuances of human culture, Bosch realized he couldn't simply approach women and ask them to bear his children in human society. Concepts like marriage and having children were intertwined with love. It's not something you do with strangers to win a human wife. Bosch feels he's not ready for this task. Realizing Bosch's lack of experience in wooing women, Zell steps in to offer guidance. Despite his small appearance, Zell has broad knowledge about humans. The lessons begin with the importance of looking neat, because human women value cleanliness, considering dirt and smell very off-putting. For the second lesson, he suggests Bosch to make it pleasant, advising the use of sweet-smelling perfume he usually uses before battling beastmen. After bathing, Zell realizes that orcs don't really fancy the scent, but Bosch explains that while he doesn't particularly like it, it's also a practical choice since those who don't use it often meet an unfortunate fate at the hands of the beastmen they fight. Zell understands the necessity and offers to lend his perfume to ensure that it not only protects him from wild beasts, but also enhances his attractiveness to humans as Bosch prepares to bathe. Zell states that if he adheres to these basic principles, looking clean, smelling nice, and radiating confidence, he should at least have a chance with a girl. It's a simple yet effective recipe for making a positive impression on a potential human partner in an instant, gripping his sword and assuming a battle position, sensing the subtle shape of silent magic around them. They seem to be surrounded entirely by the same individuals they heard near the horse carriage, while Bosch doesn't sense their presence. He assumes that dealing with humans they are likely being followed, though he's confident the fight would be easy given their numbers. Bosch prefers a peaceful resolution and decides to try talking instead. Two human guards burst into the building with a command for Bosch to step back. In response, Bosch asks them to state their business. Another knight enters the room and after removing her helmet, reveals herself as a girl. She points an accusing finger at Bosch, explaining that they received a report about an orc attacking a horse carriage on the highway. As Bosch faces the knight accusing him, she couldn't help but notice his handsomeness compared to the women she met in the forest or tried to approach along the way. She stood out as a very beautiful party and imagined having at least 3 children with him, considering it fitting for a hero to have a popular woman as a wife, a union that can keep orc pride. But she realizes the need for finesse and understands that proposing right then wasn't the right approach. Unfortunately, she couldn't check the ring on his left hand as he wore gloves, becoming increasingly impatient with Bosch's silence. The knight demands answers, prompting him to affirm that he didn't attack the carriage while unable to provide concrete proof. Bosch solemnly swears in the name of the great orc king Nemesis that he is innocent. This is lesson number 3. Always behave with dignity, even though realizing that there is no statement more manly than this intended for a high-ranking warrior. Yet the knight and her companions remain puzzled about his reference. The knight presents the claim of the orc approaching with the intention of becoming the father of children, and Bosch calmly responds that he did indeed seek their consent first. This revelation shocks the knight, and she's convinced that it's impossible for this orc to get their consent. The knight is thoroughly puzzled by Bosch's unusual behavior. Orcs are usually known for forcibly taking women or making inappropriate comments when they meet them, even brief interrogations often leading to anger and retaliation. Bosch's odd behavior, deviating from the norm, left the knight puzzled. He then accused Bosch of stealing something from the carriage. The surprise came when Bosch admitted to taking something, saying he was arrested for theft before further action was taken. Zell protested vigorously, explaining that he was captured by humans trapped in a bottle and kept on the carriage according to an agreement between humans and fairy traders. Fairy trafficking should be banned. Bosch actually helped the fairy escape from smuggling, but the knight insisted that the party must join them, a proposal Bosch didn't mind. Bosch found it interesting that the knight in front of him was not only attractive, but also didn't scream or run away upon seeing his face. She even instructed him to follow her, realizing that obedience offered more chances to interact with her, and causing a ruckus could ruin those opportunities. Bosch decided to follow the plan ordered by the knight to his subordinates. To handcuff Bosch even though his wrists were tied, Bosch saw this as an opportunity to achieve his goal of making his wife's night in her room. Commander Houston discussed the highway incident with one of his subordinates. When told that the suspect didn't seem to be a wild orc, Houston instructed his envoy to release him. However, the commander's informant mentioned that Judith, the knight who captured Bosch, still regarded the orc as suspicious, which made Houston even more annoyed. Questioning who would be responsible if this incident escalated into a war with the orcs, his subordinates acknowledged that there were many suspicious elements in the orc story. Bosch never revealed the reason for his journey, and he had a fairy accompanying him. Even when surrounded, he remained calm when the possibility of the orc being a spy arose. Houston burst out laughing, dismissing the idea that an orc could do espionage according to his opinion. If anyone were to be a spy, it would be the fairy. Commander Houston decided to devise a strategy to face the orc and fairy duel. He chose to observe the ongoing interrogation. His subordinates noted that the orcs' meeting was relatively safe when Commander Pig Killer Houston was present, but Houston warned that his presence did not guarantee a change in outcome. 10 years ago, Houston led the retreating forces, comprising exhausted army members, and amounted to 60% of the original battalion. His leadership during the retreat earned him recognition, and 5 years later, he rose to the position of general after his superior's death. Since then, Houston has carefully studied orcs. Digging into past literature and gathering information from prisoners of war, researchers found that orcs have different senses of pride and are very proud to be warriors, which sometimes harms them despite differences. Houston respects them, but the strict actions against wild orcs come from their inability to adhere to simple rules because of their reputation for killing more orcs than anyone else during the war. Houston earned the nickname Pig Killer. Commander Houston and his subordinates arrive at the prison cell where Bash is held, listening to the interrogation from outside. Houston is impressed with Judith's skills considering she's a new recruit, dropping hints as Bash explains that his journey was for personal reasons and he chose the forest path because of its speed, besides traveling to the human territory to search for something that might be found there. Houston is puzzled why an experienced orc warrior would leave his country to undertake a quest as heard by Houston. Finding Bash's voice oddly familiar, initial anxiety about entering the room creeps in, but he reassures himself that he won't lose his life in the process as Commander Houston and opens the door. He instructs Judith not to over-interrogate, but his words come to a sudden halt as his eyes meet the figure being roasted in the evening, none other than the infamous Demon Butcher, the destroyer from the Green Disaster Forest. The orc hero party adds to the surprise. Zell Bader is also present, nervously speaking to Judith. Houston asks what she's doing. She explains that she received reports of orc attacks in the western forest, tracked down Bash, and captured him at the inn. Houston reflects on the possibility that Bash was accidentally captured as if he were a real attacker, which he wouldn't do. Leaving no evidence behind, despite strong interrogation from Judith, Bash calmly replies that there's nothing more to say. Houston is puzzled by the orc's lack of anger and attributes it to the citrus aroma emanating from the cell. Observing the right moment, Judith begins to boast about Pig Killer's achievements, prompting Houston to leave the prison. The commander is confused about how to respond. He scolds the knight to be quiet and politely introduces himself to the bat, apologizing for his subordinate's rudeness. Bash's behavior brings a smile to his face when he asks about the commander's well-being, though his expression leans more toward threatening than cheerful. He assures Houston he's not angry, but the commander can't shake the feeling that they might tread on tiger tails anytime soon after being briefed about the West Forest Highway incident. Houston emphasizes that capturing Bash was a mistake. To address Bash, he stresses that orc hunting could become a problem if he doesn't follow the country's rules in response. Bash explains that on a personal mission, he didn't intend to cause trouble, and all matters are now settled. Houston instructs his subordinate to remove Bash's shackles and convey another apology to the orc once more. Observing Bash's continuous glances at Judith, Houston questions whether there's a connection between the orc hunt and the highway incident. When Bash confirms this, Houston decides to appoint Judith as an orc partner, given her responsibility to find the real culprits. However, he's surprised by the idea, fearing orc intentions and potential inappropriate behavior, despite Bash's assurance that he won't act without Judith's approval. Skeptical, Houston believes orcs reveal their true colors when alone. Increasingly annoyed, he reminds Judith that Bash is an orc hero and demands her compliance in capturing him. Tugging at his collar, he stresses Bash's special status and warns her that if this incident triggers a war with the orcs, she could face serious consequences for peacekeeping. Observing the situation, Bash intervenes and orders Houston to release Judith, expressing his anger at the commander. Bash questions if Houston feels ashamed in commanding a woman. Houston is surprised by the orc's defense of Judith, even after receiving mistreatment from her. Houston starts seeing the party from a new perspective, acknowledging the orc's kindness and their ability to control their extraordinary powers for their interests. Realizing that Bash sees him as someone who only gives orders, Houston is determined to change that perception. He decides that from Bash's perspective, he doesn't want to appear as someone who just gives orders. Houston declares that he will accompany them on their journey. Investigation into the forest during the orc meeting revolves around the qualities they desire in a woman to marry. The consensus leans towards a strong-willed human woman suitable to be the bride of war. The leader of the orcs quickly identifies a woman who captures him and realizes it. A human battalion approaches, consisting of 5 knights and 30 infantry. They decide to launch an attack while Bash awaits with determination and zeal. They discuss whether Judith is the right choice for him. Bash insists that Judith's strong-willed nature aligns with the preferences of all orcs. As Zell tends to his skin and collects something he mentions, he has prepared enough fairy scale powder and hands it to Bash. He suggests using it in a place he has never seen before. Fairy scales, though possessing healing properties, are considered similar to dirt by fairies, making them reluctant to share. The party takes fairy scales in a bottle, emphasizing EMP, remembering how the powder has saved his life on many occasions when he starts dressing up. Judith suddenly enters the room, inadvertently witnessing the orc party. Her already serious expression turns even more sour as she declares she'll wait outside with a forced bang on the party door. Confused questions arise about why she's always so angry. Zal agrees, noting that Judith has been in a bad mood since yesterday, indicating potential trouble between yesterday and today. After completing their preparations, the party, accompanied by Zell, joins Houston and Judith as they head towards the West Forest. Houston highlights that the highway mainly connects Krell and the Orc Nation, with few people using it due to security issues. Demon attacks on carriages were once rare, but are now more frequent. Hunters are informed that the demon creature is near the road, and the bugbear, usually found in the area, has been eliminated. Yet, even with this action, attacks continue. Commander Houston suspects something complex might be happening, instructing Judith to thoroughly investigate as she examines things. Judith finds something interesting. Although there aren't many demon creatures on the road, their tracks extend throughout the wilderness. Zell asks about suspicions surrounding the recent incident, prompting Houston to recount a specific event where a merchant's carriage was gradually attacked, and its cargo was stolen to avoid detection. Someone disguised as a bugbear carried out this attack due to haste. Her first case mistakenly caught Bash, believing he was the perpetrator. Upon inspecting the preserved site, Bash states that it seems like a bugbear attack, or at least to him. He acknowledges his lack of expertise in such matters, but tries to showcase his skills to Judith. First, he points out the absence of tracks from any civilized race except traders, especially as their cargo remains untouched. Even if the culprit intended to hide their actions, very little of the cargo was taken, and leaving behind food and water is highly unlikely. Bash emphasizes that during the war, incidents like this would be considered bear attacks, and if humans orchestrated it, they must have a specific purpose. Judith asserts that their primary goal is robbery and misleading others into thinking it's a terrible attack. If the authorities can't uncover the truth, the culprits can expand their territory for further robbery, revealing her frustration. Judith adds that orcs are considered foolish for attempting to lighten the mood. Zell asserts that he only sees it as a bear attack. Judith claims that even a child can conclude as much just by looking and states that further investigation won't yield additional findings. Bash ignores her skeptical attitude, suggesting they track down the real culprits, and Zell enthusiastically agrees. Judith expresses her confusion, asking what they want to track, with Zell annoyed, answering that, of course, they're talking about the bugbear. Judith remains frustrated, stating that bugbears are cunning and clever creatures who skillfully erase their tracks and continue walking without leaving a trace, even refraining from defecating until they reach home. She claims even the best hunters can't track them. The cell counter notes that bugbears are abundant demon creatures in orc territory. Being an orc is most suited for the job because orcs have been tracking bugbears for hundreds of after years of adventuring deeper into the forest. Judith acknowledges her awareness that orcs have a keen sense of smell when it comes to monsters, though she never thought it would be extraordinary, but she's sure orcs are still easily fooled because they struggle to distinguish the same scent. Soldiers engage in gossip about Commander Houston's unusual generosity towards Bash, although he usually belittles orcs. There's something about Bash that seems special because Judith remains focused on her task. Suddenly, she locks eyes with Bash, who grins at her. Judith becomes increasingly irritated and angry, asking if Bash is mocking her and feeling unworthy to face him in a fight. But Bash's smile wasn't meant to convey such sentiments, but rather originated from lessons 4 and 5 titled Smoldering Gaze and Mysterious Smile, which have instructed him that human women are vulnerable to men. A gaze is highly vulnerable to a mysterious man. A man who can throw a mysterious smile while maintaining a smoldering gaze is sure to make a woman's heart beat fast. They are nearing the bear's den, and they see a small cave in front of them. So, Houston asks Judith to hush up. He takes out a small stick and places his right hand on Bash, who suddenly shivers from being nervous because of a woman's touch. The excited party never knew a woman's hand could be so gentle. It could really melt everything and make you hug her right away. Bash thinks back to the war when he saw his battalion captain bring a woman along and he went crazy, thrashing about wildly when he didn't do anything except catch her, and he probably didn't even intend to do anything to her except catch her. Humans don't see it that way, but Bash knows he has to control himself because Lesson 6 says that men who snort too much aren't popular. Orcs get excited before fighting or when they're near a woman and they express it by snorting, but human women don't appreciate it. They consider it barbaric and savage. They decide to scout this area first and ask for volunteers to dive into the Buffer Mountain crater. Commander Houston agrees and says that if they hand it over to the ferry, there shouldn't be any problems for now. They just have to wait until he returns. But Bash knows that Zell almost always manages to find enemies, although there's a 50-50 chance they'll notice and catch him. Unfortunately, he didn't keep his promise to return before sunrise.